Listeners, beware. This podcast contains themes of the macabre and does not shy away from the details. Our content is graphic and our language is colorful. We might not be your cup of tea, so listener discretion is strongly advised. Tuned in to The Killer Tea, a podcast hosted by two best friends with a proclivity to decipher the deeply demented minds of murderers. Welcome to Season 2, Episode 15 of The Killer Tea. On today's episode, we will be discussing Robert Andrew BERDELLA, the Kansas City Butcher.
We are your hosts, Chelsea
and Christina.
Welcome back.
It's time for your daily dose of bullshit, or bi-weekly dose of bullshit. I wish it was daily. And today, of course, we have somebody who we can't really figure out what the fuck happened to.
Yeah, this guy is a puzzle.
I mean, you will see that there's stuff leading up where you're like, I understand how this can be quite traumatic. But the switch from normal
to violent serial killer.
Very abrupt.
Yes.
Very aggressive. And by the way, totally jumping off course, but thank you everybody who was able to stomach the last episode. I know I got quite a few messages from some of our friends that are also listeners that were just like, whoa, dude.
That was gross.
Yes, it was pretty gross, and we were heavy on the details, and actually, we did connect with someone that we did not realize was actually one of the victim's family members that is in our life that we had no clue was any sort of connection. And let this be a reminder to everybody out there in the podcasting world, you never know who's listening. And like I said, we actually connected with one of the victim's family members.
It's important to always be respectful of victims and of their families and of serial killers' families.
Yes. And as people who use sarcasm frequently in our podcast, it was kind of like oh, fuck.
Yeah. I mean, I do think we do a very good job of remaining respectful about victims and their families. Mm-hmm. But I know sometimes...
Very disrespectful towards the serial killers. Oh, very abundant in the disrespect.
Disrespectful to the serial killers.
I don't know how many times we've told serial killers to go get fucked. But you know what? I'm here for it. All right, guys. This is our hometown killer, by the way.
This is a little close to home. Cuyahoga Falls.
Gotta love good old Ohio, man. We just... corn-fed and murderous. All right. We are going back to January 31st, 1949, when Robert Andrew BERDELLA Jr. was born in Cuyahoga Falls, Ohio. His parents were Robert BERDELLA Sr. and Mary Louise BERDELLA, who were both devout Catholics. He was the oldest of two boys, with his brother Daniel being born when he was 7 years old, which... honestly, for the time, that's quite a big age gap.
It is quite an age gap, especially for devout Catholics.
Yes, in the 1950s America. Very interesting. Robert's parents were both deeply religious people and firmly believed in the good old spare the rod, spoil the child approach to parenting. His father often beat him as a small child with a leather strap, but seemed to spare his younger brother Daniel from the same kind of treatment.
Robert was a very bright child, but he was also a loner and stayed inside a lot, didn't go out very often, and due to being incredibly nearsighted, he had to wear very thick glasses, and he also had a speech impediment. He was diagnosed with high blood pressure as a young child and had to take several medications for that. He performed well in school, but he was bullied by his peers, didn't attend a lot of school events, and also wasn't into athletics, which is where this preferential treatment of his brother comes from. He was not athletic in the least little bit, but
as his brother got older, he became the golden child.
He did, and Robert Sr. deeply valued sports and athleticism, which left him favoring his younger son, Daniel. He would often criticize Robert about his quote-unquote failures and would rub this in his face.
Because that's not toxic.
He's not playing sports.
Yeah.
The boy has high blood pressure and he's nearsighted.
He's a sick kid. Like, high blood pressure under the age of under the age of fucking 40 is a big deal.
It is.
But so there's no real evidence of serious mental abuse and serious emotional or serious physical abuse.
I mean, in today's society, this would be considered extreme. But for the time, I'm sure the treatment he went through was probably pretty standard.
Yeah, but that doesn't negate the fact that it still could be considered abuse. We're just stating that for the time period, it wasn't like
excessive.
The neighbors were clutching pearls and that kind of stuff. So I will admit to finding some allegations of actual verbal abuse, kind of like what you were talking about, potentially more serious, but there wasn't any true examples given and nothing really palpable to back it up.
Right.
So, maybe
I encountered the same thing where there were resources that said, yes, the boys were verbally
but there was
abused.
no, like, examples given.
No, just kind of he was berated for not being a jock.
I'm going to word drop. Toxic masculinity. But okay, honestly, there was no evidence of actual like excessive abuse.
No.
And there was also no evidence of any substance abuse either, which, sometimes those things go hand in hand.
And his father worked for Ford Motor Company.
Like your grandfather and like my grandfather.
And like my father.
Yes.
He was obviously working for a good company. I'm sure they were doing well financially. So I don't think that he was raised in a household that would have produced any of the warning signs that we normally see.
Well, we even have the family routinely attended mass. The boys were enrolled in things like Sunday school and other Catholic-based religion education schools.
Right.
It's relatively safe to surmise that they were raised in a traditional 1950s blue-collar, hard-working family.
Nuclear family.
Yeah. But getting back to his limitations and his physical appearance in particular, we know kids are assholes.
Oh, yeah.
And it does not take a whole lot for little children to bully other kids. No. So I can only imagine if he has this severe nearsightedness, that he's got these thick ass glasses that are probably, come on, it's the 1950s, huge.
Yeah.
He's probably going to be an easy target for bullying.
Oh, yeah.
And then you compound that with the fact that he's got a speech impediment and he's shy. We're going to have a kid that has a little bit of isolation problems.
Oh, for sure. As he reached puberty, Robert realized he was gay. Now, we're talking the 1950s here, so he kept this to himself and even at some point briefly had a girlfriend, but that obviously didn't really go anywhere. But the fact that he realizes this in puberty and is so accepting of it within himself is good.
At 12 years old, the Berdellas had Rob baptized. While the family routinely attended church, he really wasn't all that bothered. I think maybe that might help. The fact that he was a bit more accepting was because while he was surrounded with the religious beliefs, they weren't affecting his self-image. Right. That's an assumption. It could be anything, but that's just my guess. He would later on in his teenage years, he would go back and forth between religions anyways, but by his early teenage years, he had stopped attending church altogether.
Right.
And like Chelsea said, overall by his teachers, by all accounts, they said he's an intelligent kid. He's just a little shy, just a little quiet. He was aloof and artistic and liked to daydream. He would paint and collect things, and he was just the shy, sensitive, artistic kid.
By his mid-teens, Robert, as I'm going to call him, had come to really accept himself, and his self-confidence was really growing in who he was as a person. Now, this is great, but it also led him to have an attitude, and he would be really condescending to his peers and especially to women, which is interesting.
Well, I'm not shocked by this. So he's going to learn the way to exude his confidence is going to be projecting it, because that's the only way that it's been presented to him. And then by gloating and also minimizing the successes of others, I'm not even remotely surprised by that. The thing that I find interesting is being especially critical of the opposite sex.
Yeah, and that's what I mean when I said I was surprised, is that he would be so condescending to women.
It's interesting to me that he was bullied his whole entire life and he finally gets a little sliver of confidence and he decides he's just going to be a dickhead about it. But, you know.
To each their own, I guess.
Bob is now 16 and he goes by Robert, Bob, and Rob. 4 things happen around the same period of time that kind of changed the course of his life. The first one is that in 1965, he saw a brand new psychological horror / thriller film called The Collector. I personally have never seen this movie, though I looked it up. It was critically acclaimed. There was all kinds of awards presented to it. Good stuff, I guessed. And I did read more about what the film was like, just out of curiosity, because I read the synopsis from a few other places, and it really didn't seem like anything special. But then when I actually went to the film and read more about it, I was like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. So The Collector is about this socially awkward protagonist that is an Englishman, and he stalks and kidnaps an attractive young art student. He keeps her captive in his basement and tells her that you have 4 weeks and I'll let you go, but in the 4 weeks, you're my captive and you're going to fall in love with me. Because, you know, that always works.
Stockholm Syndrome.
On the last day, he gets her a nice dress, he makes her a nice dinner, and he genuinely believes that she has developed feelings for him, even though she's like tried to escape and everything. And he proposes to her. Obviously, she's like trying to play this up, hoping to escape the man. He figures this out, there's a whole clash, and he ends up dragging her back down to the basement, where she then catches pneumonia and dies. He goes through this whole mourning process where he's like, oh my God, she's dead. She's the love of my life. But then at the end of the movie, he comes to the realization, well, she would have cooperated. She wouldn't have died, and blames it all on her. And then you see him going to look for a new victim.
Well, during this same year, on Christmas Day, while the family was in Canton, Ohio, visiting family for Christmas, Robert's father has a heart attack. He is only 39 years old when this happens, and he ends up dying. He loses his father when he's a teenager, and his father is very young, so this is very traumatic.
Mm-hmm. And this is what causes him to jump back and forth between, am I a Catholic, am I not a Catholic? And ultimately, he ends up resenting Catholicism and religion
in general
altogether.
Yeah.
Then the third thing that happens is his mother moves in and remarries Joseph Hollaby of Talmadge, Ohio, just 6 short months after his father passes away. So she starts a new relationship, moves their family in with them, and then gets married within 6 months. So obviously, this kid is distraught. Mm-hmm. I mean,
I'm not surprised that his mother does this because she is a homemaker. Mm-hmm. She doesn't have a job. She's not making money. I'm not surprised that she moved on quickly to continue her role and being able to care for her children.
Irregardless, the boys are both still mourning their father. They're traumatized.
Absolutely.
They're teenagers. He's a teenager. His younger brother is a preteen. So he vehemently resents his mother for moving on so quickly. He literally viewed this as an act of complete disregard for his father's memory, and honestly for him and his brother, who were literally going through this grieving process. And so we get to the last thing that happens when he's 16. Robert is a young gay boy. He's working at a restaurant, and he meets this older man, and I can only surmise based on what little information is there, but Robert is ultimately taken advantage of and raped while he's working as a cook at this restaurant. You bundle all that shit up into a nice trauma ball.
It's a lot to happen in 1 year.
It's a lot for a kid. A lot for anyone, honestly.
It is a lot for anyone.
So he becomes
more withdrawn.
Yes, he is over the cuckoo nest a little bit here. He's really antisocial. He doesn't have a lot of friends. He doesn't really form close bonds with anyone, including his brother, including his family. He spends most of his days doing all these different solitary activities and throwing himself into his artwork. The only real bonds that he forms with people is randomly starting to be a pen pal with several different writers across the world. That is really the only connection that he starts making with people. And at least in this, he births this new kind of hobby and interest in like ancient history and culture.
Well, and this serves him really well in his future. He starts writing to people that are in countries like Vietnam and Burma, and they would send him things to help add to his collection. So he's collecting stamps and artwork and photographs, things like that. And these people are sending more of these items to him, and he is building up this collection.
They're oddities too, which I think is worth mentioning, because oddities are quite different and a little bit more eccentric than like traditional antiques and arcane things. But there's a whole I don't know if any of you guys follow us on Instagram, but over the last spring or fall, I went to the Oddities Festival. There's a whole community around this. And even at the time that he's starting to collect it, there's an entire community around this. So it's not totally unusual that he's collecting weird artifacts and stuff.
In 1967, Robert would go on to graduate from Cuyahoga Falls High School. Now, he graduated with excellent grades and had even been put into the independent study program by one of his teachers. Now, this goes to show, like, he's an intelligent person. There's nothing wrong with the way his brain works. He's just...
Furthermore, we haven't heard of any troubling behavior from him. No. There's no setting fires. There's no getting into fights. Being an arrogant little prick is not you're going to be a serial killer flag.
No, not at all.
Thus far, no real red flags. After he graduates, he's eager to get the hell out of Dodge. He resents his mother. He doesn't want to live with his new stepfather and their family. He misses his dad. He just wants to start over. And not to mention, he's a closeted gay man.
Right.
So he applies and is later accepted to the Kansas City Art Institute. That's over 800 miles from little Northeast Ohio. Yep. And he literally gets the hell out of Dodge, away from anyone and everyone that he knows. Within the first year, things are great. He's doing good.
He's even out. He's living as an openly gay man.
No one knows who he is. No one has any expectations of him. He's in a more progressive major city that is bristling with college life.
And let's be honest, he's going to an art school.
Yeah, he can be openly gay in who he is. And he actually becomes more of like an overt gay man. Like, he's very presenting.
He's
and
flamboyant.
They described him as flamboyant. Bear in mind, at the time, Cuyahoga Falls, Ohio was considered rural. It's not considered rural now at all. No. But at the time,
it was.
That was country folk land. So now here he is in this big city.
He can be who he is.
He's loving life. He does really well in school. His professors speak very highly of him. And he has this aspiration of being a college art professor.
Yes. However,
sophomore year rolls around.
Something weird happens his sophomore year.
Things get iffy.
He starts being very open on anti-authoritarianism.
Yeah, he has a problem with authority figures now.
Weird. I'm
late to blossom when you're like 18 or 19 on that, but... Okay.
And he also begins buying drugs and then selling them to other students. He's not using them, but he is selling them to make money, which is weird. And he also begins drinking heavily.
He changes gears from wanting to become this college professor to wanting to become a chef.
Which he did show an aptitude and love for cooking as a teenager.
Yeah, he would cook. He'd like spend time with his mom cooking.
So that's not totally strange.
But he also fell in line with some of these classmates who experimented with drugs. And mind you, it's the 1960s. Prototypical college kid hippie behavior to try some LSD.
We are not
dogging on that. But he starts selling them, like Chelsea said, on the side for a little bit of spending money. but then eventually becomes known as kind of like a little minor league
Drug dealer.
And then somehow it went from that to he's fucking drunk all the time and he's abusing alcohol.
I just don't understand where the switch happened. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me.
I mean, he could have just had a fucking mental breakdown and was like, my life is crazy. I don't know.
Maybe.
Well, things continue to escalate from there.
Yeah, he starts abusing animals. And there are 3 known occasions that are documented about him abusing animals. He tortures a duck and then tortures a chicken in the presence of his peers. Now, he cooks them, but he tortures them first.
So, like I said, he switched from his majors from wanting to be a college professor to wanting to be a chef. And like we said, not weird at all. But he gets these animals with the intention to cook them and tortures them, but calls it art.
Yeah, I call bullshit. He also experiments by giving sedatives and tranquilizers to a dog.
Yes.
Fucking weird.
Also, he gets arrested for trying to sell methamphetamines to a undercover officer. Well, things actually kind of work out in his favor. He gets released after posting bond, pleads guilty, and gets slapped with like a 5-year...
They call it a suspended sentence.
It's probation.
Yeah.
Okay, that's fine. Nobody knows that we have a serial killer brewing. That's an acceptable amount of punishment for that kind of thing.
I mean, it's the first time he's ever been arrested. I expect a slap on the wrist.
But one month later, he and 2 other students get arrested for possession of marijuana and LSD. Whoops, my mistake.
However, he gets arrested and he spends 5 days in jail for this, but the charges against him end up being dropped due to lack of evidence.
And he was on probation, so I guess we just...
But I mean, I suppose if the charges are dropped, that wouldn't necessarily count. I don't know.
Well, while all of this is not model behavior, it's certainly not like
Alarming.
Hey, we have a serial killer on the loose. It's more like,
No.
Hey, we have a closeted gay kid who's gone through a lot of fucked up things and is acting out.
I would like to point out that because he's not showing any of these classic red flag signs, it makes the switch even weirder. Like him torturing a duck and a chicken and a dog, while yes, is fucked up and weird, it's not in the realm of serial killer weird.
I think that this is a problematic first sign of something going wrong in his head, but, I digress. Now, however, in 1969, poor Bob, the most unappreciated artistic genius, had to withdraw from the Kansas City Institute of Art after receiving quite a bit of backlash from the college administrators for the whole killing and cooking a duck and dog thing. Like, that didn't go over so well. So he does not want to leave Kansas City. Why? Like we said, we've got all these great reasons as to why he's there. He gets to be himself here. He gets to start a new life 800 miles from home. He's openly gay, attending gay bars. Like, why would he want to go home?
He moves to the Hyde Park district, specifically 4315 Charlotte Street.
Now, this address is... Oh, buddy. It is now very, very infamous.
He begins spending a lot of his free time going to gay bars, spending time with male prostitutes, drug addicts, petty criminals,
You
and
may
runaways.
have noticed this whole time, we haven't talked about him forming a meaningful relationship with someone.
No.
He's a full-blown
He's
adult.
a loner. He's a loner.
And still, no real presence of any boyfriends, no mentions of his first sexual experience, no mentions of really any sexual experience all the way up until this point. We have this pretty large absence of romantic partners. So while he's seeking out these prostitutes and drug addicts and all this stuff, this is purely from the kindness of his heart. He wants to help these people.
He goes as far as telling his neighbors that he feels like a foster parent.
Yeah.
And he is helping these young individuals to quit doing drugs and to get their lives back on track.
He's their knight in shining armor.
He is. Which, very strange. Very Gacy-ish.
Okay, personally, I feel like he's picked a marginalized group of people.
Of course he has.
And he's studying them. I think the cogs have now begun to turn, and he's realizing his desires. And because he is an intelligent person, he wants to evaluate how to get close to them, how to manipulate them, how to coerce them, how to build relationships with these people where he won't be a person of suspect.
Mm-hmm.
That's at least what I think. And, he would go on to say that he claimed the sole purpose of all this stuff was altruism, and that he had never had any intimate physical contact with any of those individuals. And I don't buy that for a motherfucking second.
Well, we know later on that is not true.
Yes.
By the early 1980s, most of his older companions had stopped communicating with him altogether. Now I'm talking like his college friends, anyone that he did know from his hometown. All his old contacts have basically just cut it off.
And, that could be because he came out as an openly gay man in 1960s.
It could have.
We're talking about civil rights movements, gay rights movements.
We are.
Potentially that.
But he also, during this time, is relying on these relationships with these young men that he is, quote unquote, helping. But he claims that he was getting frustrated with their lack of appreciation. And he's getting a little angry.
Well, of course, he's out here loaning these people money, doing them favors. He's allowing young men to stay with him.
Rent-free.
All out of the goodness of his heart, and in no way whatsoever expects sexual payment in return. He's not coercing anybody. No, there's no way.
During this time, he's working as a cook at a restaurant, and he also sold items, the art, the antiques that he had accrued and collected from contacts that he had established via his pen pals in Africa, Asia, South America, you name it. And he was operating this as a side business out of his home. However, his career as a chef is booming for him. He's doing really, really, really well. And he was working in several renowned Kansas City restaurants and had also joined a local chefs association and was helping to set up kind of training programs at the local community college. So he really is being successful.
Not even just that. We're talking about those associations. He is like a member of the Neighborhood Watch. He's a well-respected member of the community. People say that he's very helpful.
He becomes a chairman for the South Hyde Park Crime Prevention and Neighborhood Association. He is on TV. He's going to fundraisers. He is very active in his community. He is putting out this really amazing front for himself. He is a well-known chef. He is part of the community. He is trying to help these young troubled men get back on their feet. He is setting himself up for a very nice public persona. And I think this is all being done on purpose.
By the mid-1970s, Berdella really wasn't doing all that bad for himself. He finally became seriously emotionally involved in one relationship, but unfortunately was with an unstable Vietnam vet that had PTSD. So that didn't end up lasting very long. But nothing bad happened in that relationship to that person. They were alive and well. He was working as a senior cook, like you were talking about, in all those well-known restaurants. He essentially started his own business, and then that business started to pick up around the world, and he was actually spending so much of his time working on that side gig that it became his full-time employment, his full-time pursuit.
He gives up his career as a chef and begins renting his own booth at the Westport Flea Market. And he calls his booth Bob's Bizarre Bazaar, where he is selling this primitive art, antiques, oddities, things that he has collected from around the world. Now, while this is a very popular thing, he's not making a lot of money doing it.
He pretty much breaks even most of the time. Sometimes some months are better than others. And on the months where it's not that great, he has to kind of pick up some side jobs in order to make some little hustling money on the side. But he also starts subletting his rooms at his house for lodgers to come in and rent and pay, which in the 70s I do know was very, very common. And
Yes.
I mean, some places of the United States that kind of shit is still common, but it was very prominent, especially with hitchhikers.
We've just heard that in other killers that we've talked about where they offer rooms for rent and things like that to make money. I mean, that's pretty common.
And my
That's
brain
pretty
goes like, fucking no.
Why would you do that?
Like, very clearly, I am going to be raped and murdered if this happens. But, you know, I guess we learned from the 70s.
At this flea market, Robert befriends an other merchant there named Paul Howell and his younger son, Jerry. Now, Jerry is a very outspoken youth and gives Robert a lot of shit for being gay. Like, a lot of shit for being gay. Taunts him, makes fun of him. But after some time, Jerry would end up confiding in Robert that he and his friends made money by acting as male prostitutes.
Now this is by Robert's own admission.
Yes.
So we know how that goes.
Whether or not that's true is meh. But this ends up leading into sort of a friendship, maybe a kinship between the two.
They don't always get along. They argue sometimes. And bear in mind, he's like 18. He's 18 when they meet, 19 as the relationship. Like, in relationship, I mean like whatever it is they have.
Friendship, I guess.
They tolerate each other. And occasionally, Jerry gets into some trouble with the law.
And Robert would kind of bail him out.
Yeah, and sometimes loan him money. Mm-hmm. So there is somewhat of good rapport made there. Right. A year after meeting, Jerry will ask Bob for a ride out to a club where he's going to be in some sort of dancing competition, allegedly. While en route, because Rob agrees, he plies the kid with alcohol. I'm sure this is supposed to be like you're going out to a party, like let's pregame, have some drinks. Sure.
But he also gives him Valium and a Prosamine, which is ACP.
A medication used as a sedative and a tranquilizer for animals.
It was used as an antipsychotic during the 1950s, but has now been discontinued for use in humans and is used as a tranquilizer for animals.
So he gets this poor kid back to his house, and that's where he injects Jerry with heavy tranquilizer in order to tie him to the bed. Shit's gonna get graphic now. Just get ready.
This gets very graphic. So trigger warning, since we didn't put it at the beginning, if rape, torture,
all the nasties,
nasty shit isn't your jam, skip to the end of this podcast.
Now you might be wondering, hold the fucking phone. What do you mean rape, torture, and killing? This guy, Rob, seems like a really nice dude. How did we get here?
Newsflash, we don't fucking know.
We have no motherfucking clue how we got here. This seems excessive. This is excessive. What's happening? Our pets' heads are falling off. I have no idea.
Over the next 28 hours, Robert would drug, torture, rape, and violate Jerry. He would do unspeakable things to this 19-year-old kid. And after much pleading and questioning from Jerry about why the fuck this is happening to him, he eventually dies. And Robert claims that he tried to resuscitate Jerry, but he didn't have any success with doing it. And he honestly doesn't know what killed him. It could have been the combination of drugs. Mm-hmm. It could have been that he was gagged and vomited and choked on it.
His exact quote is either asphyxiated on his own vomit or the combination of the gag and the medicines were too strong for him to be able to catch a breath. So while he says that he attempted to resuscitate the young man, I call bullshit. I think that, obviously, I believe that his intention was to kill him from the very get-go. But once Jerry has passed on, BERDELLA drags his body downstairs to the basement where the torture and desecration of his corpse just continues. He suspended Howell's body above a large cooking pot and made several incisions to the inner elbows and the jugular vein. before leaving the body, hovering in this position overnight to allow the blood to drain from its corpse. Because what have we learned from serial killers? A corpse without blood is much easier to cut up into tiny little pieces.
The following day, that is precisely what he does. He dismembers Jerry's body using a chainsaw and wraps the sections of his body in newspaper and trash bags, and then later places these trash bags inside another trash bag and puts it outside for the garbage men to come and collect, which they do. Because, of course, they're not anticipating there to be a body in these trash bags, and his body is taken to a landfill, and who the fuck knows. At this point, Robert begins keeping track of his various means of torture. He has this stenographer book, which is basically just like a notebook, and begins taking Polaroids of his victims while he is torturing and killing them, keeping very detailed logs on what he is doing, along with his thoughts on what he is doing. This all starts with Jerry.
And it's not to say that the police didn't show up to question him, because they did. But he gave them the story of, yeah, I took him to his party and I dropped him off, and that was that.
I haven't seen him.
And they're not aware that he dropped out of school, but he was asked to leave school for torturing animals. They don't know about that. They think he's a dumb hippie that has drug charges.
Remember, he has set up this wonderful public persona of being against crime in the area, of doing fundraisers, of helping runaway children. Like, he has set himself up to not be questioned for what he is doing.
Yep.
Now, who else has done this?
John Wayne Gacy, who also was a closeted homosexual. Anyways, to me, this is a fucking leap for a first murder. This is like bringing out the big motherfucking guns for your first murder? I don't know. No, suspect.
You know what's interesting to me? His first victim is someone that he is actually close to.
That's what I'm saying. I don't think it's his first victim.
Weird. Now, maybe he didn't actually mean to kill Jerry. Maybe he truly did kill him on accident.
Maybe
no way. He got caught up.
There's no way.
Maybe he got
he
caught up.
He knows the kid's dad.
I don't know.
The kid knows him intimately. There's no fucking way.
That's what I'm saying. It doesn't. None about his first murder makes sense.
This was not his first murder. This was not his first murder. I guarantee you it was hostile homicide up in that bitch. And he was killing off people that he knew the police weren't going to investigate, that he knew wasn't going to be missed, that were traveling hippies.
Why Jerry? Jerry?
I think he was physically attracted to him. And I think he had been for a long time. He fits his, because we're going to talk more about the modus operandi here in a little bit, but he fits his modus. So I'm very passionate. I do not believe that this was his first murder.
In April of 1985, 23-year-old Robert Sheldon, who had been a former renter in Rob's house, asked if he could again stay at his house for a short period of time. Rob is like, sure, of course you can, but would later say that he found it to be inconvenient.
Okay, inconvenient. He kills him 2 days later. What kind of inconvenience can this kid have on this man?
He drugs him and holds him captive, much like he did with Jerry.
Yeah, he comes home from work, sees the kid drunk on the couch, and is like, ooh, opportunity.
Yeah, he claims that he came home from work and Sheldon was there and was intoxicated, and Robert thought that he could express some of the anger and frustration that he had towards other people on Sheldon.
That was a quote directly from the killer.
Like Jerry, Sheldon was drugged with sedatives and held captive in the second floor bedroom for 3 days. Robert would go on to torture him, including swabbing his left eye with drain cleaner, inserting needles beneath his fingertips, binding his wrist with piano wire, and filling his ears with caulk. If you don't know what caulk is, that's the shit that they use to seal your tubs with, your countertops with, the white squeegee stuff.
Yep.
Why?
He does these experiments and calls them projects. I wish I had more information on the serial killers who perform experiments. You know, all their thinking on this is flawed, right? They're not going to find out any useful information other than what causes more pain and how the body or the person reacts to intense pain. Mm-hmm. So this whole experimenting thing weirds me out.
But he did this to the dog. He experimented with tranquilizers and sedatives on the dog.
It's more like, I just want to see what this does. Not
it's this morbid curiosity of what happens if I do XYZ. Now, mind you, the entire time that he is torturing these people, he is also sexually assaulting them. Yeah. So not only is he doing horrific things to them physically, he's also raping them.
Here's my broad strokes idea here. I wonder if he hadn't had any consensual relations with anyone and started out raping those aforementioned people that he was helping, and that boyfriend that he had wasn't his first sexual encounter. And I don't know. There's a lot left up in the air.
The switch just flips for him. There's no rhyme or reason. It's just like, boop. And
it's on.
And now we're a killer.
Well, anyways, 3 days later, after BERDELLA had begun holding Sheldon captive, on April 15th, a workman came to the home to do some scheduled work on the roof at the time, leading BERDELLA to be like, oh shit, I
gotta kill this dude.
Yeah, I have to kill Sheldon. So he fatally suffocates him by placing a sack over his head, then tightens it with a piece of rope. Very familiar to the choking game that Gacy would also play. And then he later dissects Sheldon's body on the third floor bathroom.
Once again, he includes everything that he has done in his little logbook.
Moving forward from this point, we can go over all his kills and all his victims. But what you're going to find in all of them is a lot of the similar. He sticks very close to his modus.
Once he's figured out what he likes to do, that's what he does.
Both of these murders say to me, I have a tried and true method, and I'm kind of just sticking to that. So a little bit more about his modus. BERDELLA's confirmed victims were all white boys, all young men between ages of 18 and 22. They were either prostitutes or drug dealers. Most of them, if not all of them, were some sort of acquaintance of his. After getting them into his home, he's then going to placate them with some sort of drug, alcohol, something to get them relaxed. And then he is going to give them sedatives, either by tranquilizers, like injecting them or putting them into food. Then he takes them and restrains them, and the torture begins.
In June, Robert found Mark Wallace hiding in his tool shed during a storm. Mark had once helped Robert with some yard work, but they didn't know each other that well. But again, they do know each other. Robert invited him in and noticed that Mark was tense and seemed depressed and offered him chlorpromazine, saying that it would help him calm down. Of course it would. It's a fucking sedative. Mm-hmm. He's doing this on purpose. Yep. He's using it as a reason to drug Mark. Mark accepts, and once injected, Robert's like,
basically, it's game over for you, buddy.
Game over. He brings him up to the second floor bedroom and begins to torture him for most of the day. Do we want to go into the torture?
Honestly, I don't think we have to. You can quickly mention a few things.
He starts experimenting with electrocution. Begins experimenting with hypodermic needles, inserting them, and he ends up dying through a combination of, and I quote, the drugs, the gag, and the lack of oxygen.
Interesting. Now we're at 3 times where he's not really taking responsibility for hey, you actually physically fucking killed them.
No, he's saying that
it's a combination of all these
things. It's the gag, the lack of oxygen, and actually notes in his book as the time of death being 7 p.m. on June 23rd.
On September 26, 1985, Bob would answer a phone call from yet another friend named James Ferris, who was looking for a little bit of help and wanted to know if he can come stay at Berdella's home for a very short period of time. And of course, ever the philanthropist, Berdella accepts, but with the specific intention of kidnapping Ferris, whom he was going to meet at a gay bar later in the evening.
Here's the interesting thing about James. Robert later would go on to tell the police that James was the first victim that he went and meet with the specific intention of planning to torture him. Now, I call bullshit on this.
Oh, yeah, it doesn't make any fucking sense.
He'd already tortured 3 other people at this point.
Is he trying to make it look like he's less opportunistic? I don't know. This doesn't make any sense.
I think he's trying to make it look like he has not premeditated the other 3.
Bitch, you don't do... No. Just...
No.
Why are you lying? No. Oh, my God.
He ends up meeting James at a local bar and drugs his food, crushes up tranquilizers, and puts it in the meal that they were eating. He then takes James home, drugs him some more, and ties him to his bed and begins torturing him.
The whole process.
He tortures him for 27 hours, including shocking him with 7,700 volts of electricity. That's a fuck ton of electricity. And did the same thing with the hypodermic needles. I don't understand it.
He's in so much pain, he's delirious from it. Bob continues on, and he's at this point now where he can't even sit up. He's no longer functioning, and Bob is writing this in chronological order of everything that's happening in this diary of his, and the very next entry read, very delayed breathing, and then finally he noted that Ferris died with some sort of slang term that he had used in his career as a professional chef. It's called 86, and it means anything from throw it out to stop the project.
In June of 1986, Robert meets up with Todd Stoops at Kansas City's Liberty Memorial Park. Todd had been a drug addict and a prostitute who had lived briefly at Robert's house with his wife in early 1984. They had moved out, Rob hadn't seen them in a while, but Rob invited him back to his home with an offer of lunch and paid sex. So again, enticing someone to his home using food, money, alcohol, the usual.
Yeah, Stoops had said that he needed $13, which is the equivalent of $30 in today's money.
Rob would later go on to tell investigators that he had been very attracted to Todd and had held him captive for 2 weeks.
Oh my God, could you imagine? 2 fucking weeks of torture. 2 weeks.
He gradually would increase torture to make Todd comply to his sexual wishes, and again would use electric shock. This time, he shocked Todd through his eyes, would try to blind him, inject drain cleaner into his larynx to stop him from screaming.
During week 2 of this horrible, horrible capture, Stoops asks Berdella for 2 simple things. 2 human things. A soft drink and a sandwich. A pop and a sandwich. Berdella
tells him no.
Could not even fucking do that. This is how, not as if we need any other examples of how inhumane he is, but he couldn't even give the dude a drink and a bite of a sandwich.
Todd dies in a horrific way. Berdella ruptures Todd's anal wall, causing internal bleeding. I don't know if you know all that much about our digestive system, but our digestive system is not meant to mix with any other part of our body. It is a waste system. And when this is ruptured, he essentially has feces leaking into the rest of his body. This sends him into septic shock, and he ends up dying due to septic shock. So I can only imagine that if this hadn't happened, his torture may have gone on for...
God only knows how long, because he was infatuated with them.
Robert even goes on to admit that he had given Todd ice cream and soup but that Todd was unable to keep anything down.
By the spring of 1987, Bob had become friendly with yet another 20-year-old young kid named Larry Wayne Pearson. This casual kind of friendship courtship thing began when Pearson enters the oddities shop that Bob runs. And he explains that as a child, he was really, really intrigued by the occult, by witchcraft, by all that kind of stuff. And shortly thereafter, Pearson yet again becomes one of the people that lodges with Bob. And he was great. He did stuff around the house. He would clean and stuff by means of paying rent. According to Bob, he originally did not plan to capture and kill and torture him. No. He had just purely good intentions.
It wasn't until on June 23rd that Bob had to bail Larry out of jail. And Larry supposedly made a joke about habitually robbing gay men in Wichita. I don't know if this just sends Bob off the deep end and he gets angry and decides he has to kill this kid, or if it had just been a while since he'd killed someone. I don't understand. But later that evening, Bob gets Larry intoxicated and once again injects him with tranquilizers, moves him to the basement this time, and subjects him to horrible electrocution and torture, and eventually tells Larry that if he is cooperative, he will be rewarded by being moved up to the second floor bedroom.
Pearson was by far supposed to be the most cooperative out of all of them. And when I say earned Bob's trust, it's more like he was submissive and just allowed these things to happen without much of a fight. I think in his part, because he was kind of smart about it and thinking that if he makes this easier on his perpetrator, that maybe he won't get angry with him, that maybe he will have an opportunity to escape. So I don't think it was for lack of having the internal fight. I actually think
he was in survival mode. This treatment of Larry goes on for 6 weeks.
Fucking unbelievable.
6 weeks. And after he'd been in captivity for all of this time, he loses his cool and actually ends up biting Bob's penis. Bob had to go to the hospital to get care for his wound.
Couldn't have happened to a better motherfucker.
Well, this does it for Bob, and he bludgeons Larry with a tree limb and then suffocates him.
Pearson's body is ultimately dismembered, and his head was stored in a plastic bag inside of Bob's freezer before being buried ultimately in the backyard. It's so fucking depressing. He ultimately gets caught the year you're born. Like, that's how recent this stuff is. It's just so depressing. He
does get caught the year I'm born. On March 29th of 1988, Bob, the fuck shithead, abducts 22-year-old Christopher Bryson. And Christopher was a young male prostitute, and he lures him to his house by telling him that he would pay Chris for sex. Bob immediately knocks Christopher unconscious and ties him to his bed. Chris is subjected to the same abuses as the previous victims, and Bob also swabbed his eyes with
I forgot
ammonia.
about that. Oh my God, I can't even fucking imagine.
And then goes on to tell Christopher, this is a direct quote, "The only things you need to think about are you, me, and this house." Like
Pearson, BERDELLA begins to somewhat trust Bryson. And although he, still has his suspicions, obviously he doesn't want his captive to escape, they do start discussing kind of, I don't want to say the terms of his torture, but what was going to happen to him.
Yeah. And this happens fairly quickly.
Yeah.
So Christopher must have been a very intelligent individual to kind of figure out what he needed to do. It's only a few days in that Christopher manages to convince Bob to negotiate on the torture aspect. Bob will not budge on the sexual abuse.
Yeah.
He's like, no, that's not negotiable. But Chris said that he manages to convince Bob to tie his hands in front of him instead of above his head to the bed, stating that it's cutting off too much circulation to his arms. He's too uncomfortable. If he's going to be here and endure all this, can he at least be a little bit more comfortable when he's not being abused?
My theory is that he enjoyed the longevity of being able to have a sex slave for 6 weeks with the last guy.
And he didn't want to fuck that up.
And he's now found his new thing. Like, oh, I can have a sex slave for longer than 3 days, for longer than a day. If I treat them a little bit better, I can get a couple months out of this. I think that's where this was going.
Oh, I completely agree with you. He also manages to convince Bob to leave the television on in the room with the remote control in reach. On the 4th day that Bryson is being held captive, he manages to get free of his restraints by burning them with matches that Bob had accidentally left in the room. Bob was out of the house at this time. He was at his shop. He was working. Bryson then jumps out of the 2nd floor window wearing nothing but a dog collar.
Poor baby.
He manages to run down the street where there is a meter reader, thank God, that was checking the meters while screaming his head off that he needed help and to call the police. The meter reader leads him to a nearby house, and the residents of that house phone the police. The police immediately come and they begin questioning Bryson. He initially claims that he had been hitchhiking when he is abducted, but eventually goes on to give the details of being held in captivity, the tortures, the rapes, and his escape over the last 4 days. Police take note that in addition to wearing a dog collar, Christopher also has a broken foot, red and swollen eyes, and visible scars and welts covering his entire body.
If you're wondering why he tells them he's a hitchhiker, we've said 100 times.
Police don't take male prostitutes. Police don't take prostitutes seriously.
And he wanted justice. He was a savvy kid, and he knew that if he admitted to illegal activity like prostitution,
he could get in trouble,
and admitted to being a homosexual on top of it, he wasn't going to get justice.
No.
And he wanted this man to go down. So he gave them a story that was believable, and that made him look... He was 100% innocent, but more objectively innocent.
In the justice system's eyes.
Yes.
Police believe Christopher, thank God. I mean, how could they not? And they set up surveillance on Bob's home. Christopher is sent for medical treatment, and they apply for a search warrant.
Thank God.
Once Christopher had received medical treatment, he was then brought back to the police station where he is questioned again by officers. He told them that Bob had shown him Polaroids of other victims and had told him what he had done to those other victims, how he had killed them, how he had tortured them, what he had done with them, all the details. And of course he did. Bob thinks he's going to get away with this. He's already gotten away with it 5 times.
He does keep mementos and stuff too. His little things that are collectibles, and he does show them to other victims. And this is part of the reason why he gets the nickname The Collector. It's not just from the movie The Collector. Right. He does keep memorabilia.
That very same day.
Thank God this was swift and, yes.
He comes home from work, and the police officers immediately go up and are like, hey, we want to come in. And he's like, nay, not letting you in my house. Well, the search warrant comes through, and they show him the search warrant, and obviously at this point, he has no choice. They have a search warrant. They get to come in.
And the whole point is they want to corroborate Bryson's story with what's going on in the house. Right. And sure as shit,
they are able to.
Thank fucking God. They find everything. The electric transformer, wires leading to the bed, a metal tray containing syringes, small bottles of apparently prescription drugs,
burnt ropes, the matches,
all the stuff they need.
And the bed even shows evidence that there had been past struggles in the room. Like the posts on the bed were worn down in areas where it looked like something had been tied to them. Mm-hmm. So this completely makes sense. Upon further searching of the house, they find a human skull inside a closet, a partially decomposed head in the backyard, several human vertebrae, teeth, a hacksaw and miter saw in the basement, as well as a chainsaw that had blood stains, fresh pubic hair, and basically barrels of blood all in the basement. They also find 334 Polaroid pictures and 34 snapshot prints of various male individuals in various locations around the house. Some of these photos feature Christopher, which also shows him being tortured and raped, and BERDELLA is in some of these photos as well. They find all kinds of just disgusting things in the house.
But a lot of stuff that ultimately leads them to other murders that he's committed. One of which being Jerry, and then a wallet with a driver's license that has the missing person's name of James Ferris. All in all, this was a pretty good search warrant. Yes. They got a lot of stuff.
Well, and the icing on the cake is they find his ledger containing all of his notes and details in his bedroom.
Who, buddy?
11 detectives and 1 sergeant are assigned to the case. This is the task force that is put together to research this case.
You know they're thinking, holy fuck, shit. There's probably going to be so many bodies. Yes. This guy's probably killed so many people. And I agree, probably a lot more than what we think there is.
They discover that he is a well-known individual among the Kansas City's male prostitutes and is well-known for preying on young men. He was also considered a suspect in the disappearance of Jerry Howell and James Ferris and had been questioned in both of these disappearances but had denied having anything to do with them. Police had even had surveillance on him, but at that point, he wasn't doing anything. There was no evidence that he had done anything wrong, and so nothing was ever done about it.
A ton of stuff happens here. We get him going back and forth with the police, denying everything, saying, I had nothing to do with so-and-so's disappearance. I'm not a suspect. And then even going to the lengths of trying to get charges for harassment against the police department with his lawyer. Yeah. He's psycho, just absolutely psychotic. He even had Paul Howell's family identify pictures of him that he had. Another from James Ferris's wife identifying him. It is stacking up.
And he is denying it the entire time. Investigators have his book, right? Mm-hmm. He has several names listed in this book, just lists of young men's names. They begin looking into these people. One of these individuals is a young man named Freddie Kellogg. He tells police that he and several other young men had intermittently rented a room in Robert's house since the early 1980s, and that he had a really bad habit of plying his renters with drugs before engaging in sex with them, consensual or not. Clearly, he has a history of raping his lodgers. Whether he's killing them or not, I don't know, but he's definitely raping them and committing sexual assaults. Kellogg goes on to tell investigators that part of the condition that BERDELLA had set on him to stay at the house was persuading other young men to attend parties that were being thrown at the home. Many rumors were in that male prostitute community that were all about the horrible things that BERDELLA was doing, and a lot of male prostitutes were refusing to engage with him at all because there were these rumors. But again, this is part of a community that is on the fringes of society, is not going to go to the police with their concerns because they are committing illegal activity. Kellogg was also able to identify 3 of the other individuals in the photos found at Robert's house: Todd Stoops, Robert Sheldon, and Larry Wayne Pearson. So thank God for Kellogg because he was able to identify more people. On April 13th, Robert was ordered to pose nude for photos so that his body could be compared to the Polaroids. He was also ordered to submit a handwriting sample to be compared to the ledger found in his home. He was like, nope, I'm not fucking doing it. Fuck you. not cooperating. He ends up being
He was not
sentenced
cooperative at all throughout any of this.
He gets sentenced to 6 months in jail for contempt of court, which realistically probably just gave investigators more time.
Yeah, but he was doing he was so uncooperative. There is no admission from him. There's not even an admission of guilt or of wrongdoing. And oftentimes he would invoke his right to silence.
Yeah.
Like, just say,
I'm not saying anything.
Not participating in this. So as you can imagine, they needed help from people like Kellogg to get more information because he was not budging.
Robert Sheldon and Mark Wallace were able to be positively identified using dental records because their teeth were found in his home, and the head found in his backyard was able to be positively identified as Larry Wayne Pearson. A grand jury does indict Robert Berdella on July 22nd, 1988 for the murder of Larry Wayne Pearson. He shocks the shit out of everybody by pleading guilty, which nobody thought he would do because up until this point, he's been completely uncooperative. When questioned by the judge and the attorneys about his guilty plea, Robert stated, "I put a plastic bag over his head and tied it with a rope and allowed him to suffocate." When asked
allowed him to suffocate.
Yeah.
I suffocated him. Why is that so hard?
When asked if he performed this act deliberately and with malice aforethought, which I think they mean premeditation,
Gotcha.
he simply stated, yes. By confessing to the city's prosecutor, Albert Riederer, Berdella was able to negotiate out of the death penalty, which I think is fucked up. I think he should have gotten the death penalty. He ends up being promised that the death penalty would not be sought if he provided all the details of his actions, and so he does. And Judge Vincent E. Baker finds Robert guilty of 6 counts of murder and has sentenced him to 2 life sentences without parole. Why he only got 2 life sentences for killing 5 people, I don't understand, but whatever.
He gets more out of this than I think he should.
I agree. It is recommended that he goes for a psychiatric evaluation, and he does. He goes and he has this done. During the psychiatric evaluation, the real Bob Berdella kind of comes to life. He goes on to tell these psychiatrists that he appreciates control and considers himself to be very important. He wanted his victims to be his slaves, which we could surmise, and claims to never have killed them intentionally, which
fucking bullshit. Just admit, God, just fucking admit it. Like,
and it's theorized that serial killers do this to like justify their actions or to help themselves feel less guilty about that. But Berdella often refers to his victims as his play toys. And he believed that he was a good and upstanding individual who may have just done some terrible things. Now, much like Gacy, he was not happy about having his name smeared in the public eye. So much so that he opened a trust fund for his victims' families. And it was helped along by Reverend Roger Coleman, who had stood by him throughout the entire ordeal.
Is there any diagnosis of narcissism?
Not that I could find.
Because wouldn't that be...
He definitely suits the standard for a narcissist, or APD even. Some of the victims' families sued Berdella for wrongful death, but they had met the statute of limitations and were unable to. Berdella, whenever he was talking about his victims or their families, was very smug and condescending and just kind of like a sucks to suck, basically. He goes on to claim that he didn't understand why he was a serial killer or what in his life had contributed to that behavior.
No, I do. I mean, I can kind of buy that if he just snapped, if he... was a born killer. I don't know.
Well, he was insanely offended that people would claim that he should know why. He was like offended, like, I don't know why, and you're incompetent for thinking that I should know why. When asked if he is a part of Satanism, he rejects this emphatically. He is just like, absolutely not.
I
This
don't
has
ever think that
nothing to do with Satanism.
I think the whole stuff with the occult was more
It's
falling
just a
into the
sign
oddities thing.
And it's a sign of the times.
Yeah.
Like, it is what it is.
I agree.
Unfortunately, he only goes on to serve 4 years in prison because he dies of a motherfucking heart attack at the age of 43 in 1992. Before his death, this is very interesting, a Dell Dunmeyer from, I'm not even going to try to pronounce this name, Pennsylvania. He is a millionaire. He was then living in the Kansas City suburbs and goes on to purchase all of Berdella's belongings, including the house on Charlotte Street, the inventory in his home, and his store. He claims to have no interest in the items other than he felt he, quote unquote, understood Berdella.
Then you have interest in the items.
How do you understand this man? Has anyone looked into this Dell Dunmeyer? Do we need to be worried?
I have questions.
This is suspicious.
Okay, but this son of a bitch, right? So the families are pursuing civil suits against Berdella. Now, when this happens, evidence gets released to those respective parties. After this happens, the millionaire is able to access and purchase them. Now, this is not something that the police would want to happen, but because the case is closed and the evidence was supplied for the civil suits, he's actually legally able to do this. And do you know what fucking happens? He sells the murderabilia for thousands of dollars and fucking people buy it.
Well, he goes on to level the house and then sells the property to the surrounding neighbors.
I don't believe in murderabilia.
We've talked about it before.
This. Now, I understand that place doesn't need to become a living tomb. Like, I actually think it's more conducive to moving on for the entire neighborhood to just throw a house on it and, like, make
tear
life
the house
happen.
down, make it a park, put another house on it. Do something with it.
Don't leave it empty. Yes, I understand that. My fucking problem comes with these sons of a bitches who sell murderabilia online. I'm never going to be okay with it. I think it's sick as fuck. I believe that if there's a forensic science museum, sure, fine. If the victims' families don't want that shit, burn it. Get rid of it. Mm-hmm. But to sell it online and have it be collector's items is just such a violation of basic human decency to me. And you can come for me, I'll fucking fight you. Because there's no way. I don't agree with it. I think it's so fucking wrong. And I especially don't like when these stupid motherfucking serial killers become artists in jail and sell their artwork for thousands of dollars. We've already touched on it. I'm just an angry person.
I know that we do our palate cleanser and we joke about serial killers. I know we do this. And yes, we laugh. And yes, we giggle dick at it. But you will never see me wearing a shirt that has Dahmer's face on it.
Yes. Strong opinions abundant. And we can be pretty offensive people. We understand that by just what we do, by nature of our curiosity and by having this podcast, some people can view that as offensive. And that's totally fine. But this is my line in the sand. And we've talked about it before. But this one is such a gross abuse of the legal system in the respect of getting access to the evidence because of civil suits and then purchasing that by proxy. Now it was only published 8 months ago, but an interview done by a local news station where one of the victims' family members found out about this and contacted the news station, and they did a lovely story on it. I sent it to Chelsea earlier, and it is by KCTV5 News. You can find it on YouTube, and the title of the video is Family Questions How Crime Scene Evidence from Berdella Murders Now for Sale. If this is something that intrigues you, I definitely recommend watching this video because I didn't know that evidence could ever be put up for sale. I never knew that.
Seems really weird.
If evidence, I did not realize that evidence could be released back to the families for civil suits. I thought that it still belonged to law enforcement.
Now, it doesn't surprise me that once a case is closed, evidence could be released back to the families. To me, that makes perfect sense. There may be personal items in there that the family may want. Yes, I totally get that. But my point being with that, it should only be released back to families.
All right, palate cleanser.
Palate cleanser.
Palate cleanser.
This is the path.
No, keep it in there. This is the palate cleanser. Dude, it's so good.
Me, watching true crime shows, narrator, but she left her fingerprints on the doorknob. Me, you dumb bitch.
You absolute salad, as my husband would say.
My friends, go out with us tonight. Me, I'm so sorry, but I am very busy. Friends, oh, okay. Me, 5 minutes later, watching a documentary on Dahmer.
This one's a little insensitive, but still chuckle-worthy. Me, I like serial killers, person, but they killed people. Then it's somebody doing the eye roll face going, oh my god, whoa, really? I had no idea, that's crazy.
Everyone, the world is fucked up. Netflix, new Ted Bundy documentary. Everyone sitting down with popcorn.
As a serial killer, my name would be The Suspense. So that way my victims would be like, oh no, the suspense is killing me. And we would both laugh before I killed you. It's a picture of Homer Simpson scared, and it says, me after watching fake horror movies. And then it's a picture of Homer Simpson sleeping peacefully. Me after watching true crime serial killer documentaries. It's a picture of pliers, a pocket knife, a razor, a screw, and a duck with a blindfold. And it says, walked in on my kid playing with these. I'm raising a little doctor. And then somebody says below it, nah, you're raising a serial killer.
We are 4 episodes away from the end of season 2.
We're going into season 3.
Not to mention, when our next episode comes out, after this one, we will officially have been podcasting for an entire year.
Yay!
Yay!
We're going to be a year old. Maybe we should do like a sticker giveaway or something.
Ooh. If you don't follow us on Instagram, go follow us on Instagram. We will likely be doing a giveaway for our 1-year anniversary. It'll just be something small and fun, but it'll be from us and
yeah, made with love. And all of our little pennies that we have.
We also have been tossing around the idea of whether or not we should start a Patreon account. At this time, we have decided, no, we're not going to do Patreon. First of all, we don't have a whole lot of extra content to put out. Mm-hmm. Second of all, with everything going on in the world, I would feel like an asshole doing content that you had to pay for.
Yeah, we're here to distract you.
Yeah, we're here to provide entertainment.
For free.
With that being said,
if you want to support our podcast financially, you can buy some of our really cool products. So you have a little bit of something fun from us, and it helps us convince our husbands that this is going to be more than a hobby.
Yes. We also have a donate button on our website. If you are one of those people that does like to be on Patreon, that does like to help financially support podcasters, in no way, shape, or form will we ever ask you to donate to our podcast. So please don't take it that way. But it's there. If you are one of those people who like to do those things, all the proceeds from our merch and from anything that we sell goes immediately right back into the podcast. That's redoing our studio, upgrading our equipment, paying for better technology.
If you cannot tell, we try really, really hard to constantly improve the sound quality. And our sound has jumped significantly
From
season one. When people are like, I'm going to listen to your podcast, I'm like, okay, but don't listen to season 1. Start on season 2. And maybe someday we might venture back and revisit and or re-edit those. But there's only so much you can do with low quality mics. So maybe someday, maybe in future Patreon land, if that ever happens,
We'll redo those episodes.
With new research and better mics and all that stuff.
Yes.
But until then, we appreciate your support. Do the damn thing. Like, follow, all that fun stuff on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter.
We're on YouTube.
All at The Killer T.
Yes. You can also send us an email at thekillerT@gmail.com if you feel so inclined to. But
Yeah, that's everything.
I think that's it.
All right, y'all. Until next time.
Bye. Join us in the next episode where we discuss part 1 of Eileen Warnos, The Damsel of Death. Join us in our next episode where we discuss part 1 of... Wait, do we say their name first or do we say their moniker
We
first?
go back and forth, but...
Chicken wing, hot dog and bologna, chicken and macaroni, chilling with my homies. Chicken wings, hot dogs and bologna, chicken and macaroni, chilling out with my homies.
I'm just coming in with harmonies. It's fine.